Hi, long time no see. My name's Jax. This is my channel Morbidly Macabre, where I talk about morbid history, true crime, cryptids, and other spooky topics that might catch my interest. And I've been gone for a while. Now, I could say, oh, I've been really busy with work, or, oh, the holidays were awful, but I kind of lost that oomph that had me doing my videos, editing, writing, all of it. And I'm going to be upfront. It was not a very pretty place in my brain for a couple of months, so I took a step back. I even stopped streaming for a while, but I feel much better. I'm back, and I've lost a lot of weight, but that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about a serial killer from the 1400s named, and I'm going to butcher this the entire time because French, while I might be Cajun French, is not a language I speak that much. Gilles De Rais. We're going to be talking about Gilles De Rais. So let's get right into it, shall we? So who was Gilles De Rais? Well, he was a French nobleman who was born in the early 1400s. His birth is estimated, as there is no specific records that specifically state when he was born. His mother was Marie de Craon, and his father was Guy de Laval-Rais. House of Craon was a wealthy family, and the House of Laval was one of the most important Breton lineages in this century. Now, from here on out, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about I couldn't 100% verify, so take everything I say with a little grain of salt. And when we get to the discussion of what he did during the war, I am not an expert at all by any means when it comes to anything to do with foreign wars, foreign affairs, or even domestic wars. That was not something I paid attention to in history, and I should be a lot better at it, but I'm not. So back to it. He was also linked to the House of Montmorency. He lived during a time in France where they were under the feudal system. It's kind of like the Game of Thrones. You're born into a family, and that family's standing is where your standing is. For example, you have the Starks. They are the lords of the north, but they're not the king, but in their area, they are the lord, the king for that specific area. They still respond to King Robert, but they are the highest ranking person who owns all of that land in the north. In this case, Gilles de Rais owned a lot of land, and he was basically a Stark. And he served King Charles, who was basically King Robert. That's the basic way I can explain this. I am, again, not that great at explaining a lot of historical stuff, and I am working on getting better at it. He was born in Champtock-sur-Loire, and he was orphaned in 1415 when his father died in a hunting accident, and his mother died shortly after. The cause of death for his mother is unknown, and he does have a little brother named René de la Suze, who was born in 1414. René and Gilles were raised by their father, Jean de Craon, and Jean lost his own son at the Battle of Agincourt, a battle during the 100-Year War, and he named the two boys his heirs. Now, Gilles was betrothed to be married to two women before he married his wife, and both of the women that he was betrothed to were presumed to have died before they could get married, but one might have run off to join a convent, and he married Catherine de la Thouars, who happened to be his fourth cousin. Now, due to disputes between the Craon family and Catherine's family, specifically Catherine's father, Miles II de Thouars, he abducted Catherine to marry her, and the initial marriage contract was dated November 30th, 1420. Why do I say initial? Well, the church declared their marriage incestuous and said this isn't a legitimate marriage, Well, after Miles II de Thouars died, the marriage actually brought the two houses closer. And I mean, who cares? It's your fourth cousin. The church decided that the marriage was no longer incestuous. Don't marry your cousin. I feel like this goes without saying. Don't marry your cousin. The church absolved the incest crime and said, this isn't incest. This is your fourth cousin. You're not marrying into your family. And they celebrated their marriage on the 26th of June, 1422. The union strengthened his position, and in an effort to maintain his position in the family, he became involved in several disputes over wealth and land. Now, we've already established he is not a stranger to kidnapping, so at one point, Jean de Craon, his grandfather, kidnapped Beatrice de Montjean, Catherine's mother, in an attempt to secure a dower for Catherine, which is an agreement between the husband and the wife's family that would protect the wife and support her if she was to become a widow. Beatrice's new husband attempted to take them to court over this, and the president of parliament at that time was assaulted on his way to make the judgment. We don't know who assaulted him, but you can make a guess. And the whole thing was kind of thrown out at that point. So just how powerful was Gilles De Rais? Well, he was the holder of the barony of Retz, which is one of the 6 oldest baronies of the Duchy of Brittany. The title indicated that he was a significant landowner with authority over that region. Again, he is a Stark. His estates were spread out over several states in France: Brittany, Anjou, Poitou, Maine, and Angoumois. With the familial connections he had, he was in the position to basically control the economy. He was extremely powerful. He was one of the richest men in France at this time. He was a high-ranking military commander, which we will talk about later, because he has some interesting ties to Joan of Arc, and he had ties to the royal court. This considerable influence that he had likely contributed to his ability to evade accountability for a significant portion of his crimes, as he could manipulate situations to his advantage. There is so much to discuss with his military career that I'm going to try to keep it to the very basic main points. We'll be bypassing a lot of the smaller battles that he fought. Let's just say he was very good at war. He fought during the 100-Year Wars in France, and around 1427, his name began to pop up with him leading guerrilla warfare against the English. This guerrilla warfare that he was leading led to them taking back notable fortresses and castles along the main border. From 1429 to 1434, he was on the royal council as King Charles VII's counselor or chamberlain. In 1429, he contributed to the lifting of the siege of Orleans, and along with Joan of Arc, he participated in the Loire campaign, recapturing towns that were occupied by the English. On July 16, 1429, during the coronation, Rais and 3 other lords carried the holy ampulla, which is the glass that held the royal oil for anointing the kings of France for over 600 years, from the Basilica of Saint Remy to the Metropolitan Church. That same day, Rais was made the Marshal of France. During the siege of Paris on September 8, 1429, Joan of Arc wanted Rais with her on the assault of the port of Saint Honore, and the siege was lifted and the army withdrew. Later in September, Rais was honored again, and his title was confirmed by the king. He is the Marshal of France, or one of them. Joan was later captured in December of 1430 and executed by the English for heresy in May of 1431. If Joan of Arc is someone that you want me to talk about or make a video on in the future, leave it in the comments down below. In November of 1432, Jean de Craon died. In 1434, the English threatened the town of Sille, which belonged to Anne de Sille, Jean de Crayon's wife. Now, with a guy like Rais, he wasn't going to take this lightly, and along with the heads of the House of Laval, they took part in a military expedition to remove the English and break the siege, but by the time they arrived to the town, there was no fighting. The English just left. And by mid-1434, Rais wasn't really fighting anymore. And by August of 1434, King Charles VII threatened to strip him of his marshal title. And he did. He is no longer the Marshal of France. He was then cut off in 1435 following complaints from his family and the House of Laval. So, why was he cut off? What happened that caused him to fall from grace so quickly? It's like 4 years. What could have happened? He spent all of his money. In a huge brief detailing his assets, he spent a ton of money on his military spending and sold off a lot of his properties that were inherited to maintain the cost of his own troops. The military had built his reputation up, but also destroyed his reputation by him squandering his entire fortune on it. He also had a very extravagant lifestyle. And now is where we get into the reason why we're here. I did so much setup so you could see how this man was positioned in society for people to look the other way for everything that he did. There was mention of occult activity where he attempted to summon a demon but was unsuccessful and decided that he needed to offer parts of a child to this demon. He wanted to summon the demon to save his rapidly depleting finances and to keep funding his extravagant lifestyle. He had sorcerers and wizards of the time coming out to help him summon this demon. I haven't mentioned it yet, but he did commission a chapel to be built that was called the Chapel of the Holy Innocents, and it was staffed by a choir of young boys. In his confession later, Rais stated that his crimes against children began around 1432. Children went missing around his estates, which it was common for children at this time to go live with nobles and be their squires and learn the ways of nobility if they were selected, or if they would become a servant for a noble. That was very normal. Kind of like with Elizabeth Bathory, some parents assumed that their child just went to go have a better life and they were a servant for some noble. But during his trial, some witnesses did report observing deceased children being disposed of by his servants in 1437. But again, he had this lofty reputation, so families didn't come forward. In his confession, he described the ritualistic torture and murder of the children in this attempt to save his fortune. Now, I'm not going to mention what happened to the children, mainly because I don't know. There's no definitive descriptions of what happened to the children, at least none that I could find or verify. I mean, there was one on a Criminal Minds wiki, but that's not very reliable. But I, again, don't really think I want to know what happened to these children because I feel like that's just something I don't need to know. Now, Gilles De Rais was a lot of things. A child murderer, a decorated and then stripped war marshal, companion of Joan of Arc, rich man, poor man, well, he was never poor, and a kidnapper. Remember how he abducted his cousin and then helped his grandfather abduct his cousin's wife so he could marry her and get her dower? Well, he was finally arrested in 1430 when he tried to kidnap a priest after a dispute. He had previously sold his church, Saint Etienne de Mermort, twice and attempted to buy it back a third time so he could sell it again, but the current administrator of the church resisted. In May of 1440, he stormed the church, interrupted the Mass of Jean Le Ferron, which is very bad to do in the Catholic faith, and then held him as prisoner. and this led to his arrest and an investigation into his crimes. He was tried in both ecclesiastical court and civil court for a large range of offenses: heresy, sodomy, and the murder of over 100 children. He was sentenced to death by both hanging and burning simultaneously. He was executed on October 26th, 1440. And modern-day historians questioned whether or not he was actually guilty of the crimes that he was accused of, especially since he only confessed under the threat of torture. However, I myself believe that he did do it. He was also the inspiration for Bluebeard. If you want me to talk more about the legend of Bluebeard, Elizabeth Bathory, or Joan of Arc, let me know in the comments below. Well, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you all so much for joining me as we delved a little bit into one of the monsters of history. Now, I do stream over on Twitch 5 to 6 days a week. I'm at least trying to again at Jax Marie Gaming. I also post some of my better VODs over at the Jax Marie Gaming YouTube channel. If you are interested in any topics, please leave it down in the comment section below. I look forward to any and all suggestions for video topics in the future. And once again, thank you so much for joining me. I really am happy to be back to filming videos again for you all. And I hope you all have a happy new year. And as always, stay curious. Goodbye.